public spending on private nurses soaring in this province. In one 6-month period last year, the government spent more than $34 million on nurses from private agencies. Now, you compare that to before the pandemic. So in the years before the pandemic, the government was spending $1 million. 34 million compared to $1 million. Those are the figures that came from a report published in the Globe and Mail. The story contains several other interesting nuggets. For example, the private nursing firm hired by Newfoundland and Labrador charged nearly double the rate of similar agencies in Canada. And they billed the province for a host of extras, such as licensing, certification, specialized training, even furniture, and some cable bills. As I mentioned, On the Go has put a request in for an interview with Health Minister Tom Osborne. He was in meetings all day, expecting to hear from him tomorrow. Clearly, this is of concern to many, and that includes Yvette Coffey, who joins me on the line. She's president of the Registered Nurses Union. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Anthony.
So how surprised were you by the details contained in that Globe and Mail investigative report?
Surprised and fuming. To think that not only did we pay a private agency to supply us with registered nurses and nurse practitioners, but we paid for their training and their cable bills, and they got double paid for meal allowances, plus making over 6 times the amount that any registered nurse in Newfoundland and Labrador is making. I'm fuming today. I'm even worse today than I was yesterday.
I mean, you and I have spoken about this issue before. When you say 6 times, are we talking about what, net salary or what? Because that sounds like a very high difference.
Hourly rate of pay. So registered nurses in Newfoundland and Labrador making around $37.86 to $47.16 per hour.
Yep.
And these private agencies were paid $312 per hour for these nurses.
All right, now
plus all the rest of the stuff.
Right, but just to be clear, that's being paid to the agency. That's not what the nurse is necessarily getting, right?
No. Yeah, so that's what's being paid to the agency. 6 times what our registered nurses are making. It's still 2 to 3 times the amount the actual nurses are getting, anywhere from $100 to $80 to $100, $120 an hour.
Were you aware of this kind of money before now?
I was aware of the money being paid that the agency nurses. Thing is, we don't have access to that information. And even right now, while we're trying to evaluate the unionized travel locum group that we have here in Newfoundland and Labrador, we're doing a pilot in Labrador. The only way we can get the information about what was paid to the agencies is the health authority has to actually ask the agency for the invoices to add them all up. We've done a very poor job here of keeping track of the amount of taxpayer money that has been spent, and to find out that not only did the private agency, this particular company, Canadian Health Labs, not only did they charge for meals for the private agency nurses, our health authority actually paid the meals on top of that. They paid them per diem every day that they were working. We paid for car rentals. We paid for taxis. I mean, that report is so in-depth, it is mind-boggling. And the lack of oversight on behalf of Newfoundland and Labrador is astounding. And we are calling for an investigation by the Auditor General into the funds that have been spent on private agencies and the lack of oversight.
So have you contacted the Auditor General to ask her to look into this?
Myself and Linda Silas, the president of Canadian Federation of Nurses Union, there was a letter already went to the Auditor General in the past month.
I wonder if part of you, I sort of look at what's happening. You and I have spoken about this many times now in terms of the shortage of nurses. If on the one hand, obviously there's some eyeball raising numbers here, but given the worldwide shortage of nurses and the demand, isn't it sort of almost to be anticipated that you're going to pay a lot when there's a huge demand and not enough supply of nurses?
Well, prior to the pandemic, we were calling on all governments. We wanted a core staffing review for acute care, community health, long-term care. We still don't have our core staffing review done. So that was 2019. That was signed off on in a collective agreement. it's not like this happened overnight and that we haven't been predicting the shortage of registered nurses to come with our aging population and the aging workforce in Canada. We've been calling on the federal government for a health human resource plan, and even here in this province as well, which led to the formation of the Office for Retention and Recruitment of Healthcare Workers, with an ADM Assistant Deputy Minister assigned to oversee that and lead it here in Newfoundland and Labrador. This money that is being spent, when I think about the nickel and diming that's being done to our members who are working in this public system, who are holding the system together, and even now with newly negotiated incentives that we just got in our recent collective agreement, members are not getting the full amount, for example, for the permanent full-time incentive that they would get paid bi-weekly. If they have one paid sick leave shift during that 2-week period, they're not getting the permanent full-time incentive. So nickel and diming the people who are here holding the system together while we're paying double meal amounts to a private agency. And I might add, this private agency who went and bought houses up in New Brunswick and then was threatening to evict people out of the housing when we have a housing shortage in Canada for him to use for agency nurses. He also has a car rental company that we also ended up paying for.
This is the same company.
The same company. Blows my mind. This all came out in this report. Mm-hmm. I can tell you my 3 key messages here, and first of all, calling for an investigation. But the other is there's 3 Ds when it comes to what this does to the current workforce. It shows them disrespect, it's demoralizing, and it's a disregard for their well-being and the retention of our own nurses in this publicly funded system.
You mentioned retention, and I wonder, given the salary issue and the benefits, putting aside issues of pensions and whatever is there in your collective agreement, do you have any concerns that the incentive here is, why be an RN when all the money seems to be in being a travel nurse?
Well, this is the whole thing, the whole argument about private versus public healthcare system. And I had a recent conversation with a political person I won't name, talking about hybrid public and private. And I was explaining to this individual, once you start pulling people out of the public system, as we have done with this private agency, nursing private agencies, we're not getting them back. We're having a very hard time getting them back because we can't compete with them. And this is not only Newfoundland and Labrador and New Brunswick. This is every single province in the country. I'm hearing today about in Saskatchewan, there's a place where there's 4 agency nurses working and 1 regular RN, and they're refusing to pay that regular RN the rates that they're paying the agency nurses, but they're paying them overtime and everything. It's ridiculous. And how can you keep people when you're showing them that amount of disrespect?
You're listening On the Go on CBC Radio 1. My guest is Yvette Coffey. I'm Anthony Germain, Yvette, President of the Registered Nurses Union of Newfoundland and Labrador. My understanding is that the Leader of the Opposition has basically echoed your call to have the Auditor General take a look into just what's going on with these travel nurses and these agencies and these fees that are paid. What do you actually expect the Auditor General to do? Because normally, from my experience in following the AG, it takes a while to get results, and this would seem to be, something that has to do with what's a short-term crisis in nursing. Well, I say short-term, it's going to last for a long time, I think. But what do you want the Auditor General to actually achieve?
Well, I think there needs to be oversight on taxpayers' money that's being spent on these private agencies that are making big profits off of the backs of people who are actually working in the system and staying here. I don't expect them to, say, stop it today and it's over with. All the recruitment that's been happening in this province, we're seeing hundreds, according to the department, being hired and recruited. But we're not making any headway. We made a headway of 30 plus. We are 30 to the good. We still have 1,715 vacancies here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Money needs to be diverted and spent on the people who are in the system to retain them, to attract their new graduates to stay here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and to work in our publicly funded system. That's what we're asking for.
Yeah,
there needs to be a ban on agency nurses across the country. But unless every province does that, we're hard-pressed to get one province to do it alone.
Well, you put your finger on one of the major problems in healthcare in Canada, is that being a provincial jurisdiction, basically we end up competing against each other. But when you say, Yvette Coffey, that there's 1,715 vacancies, how much worse would it be if the government didn't have any of these travel nurses, as expensive as they are?
But they're not part of those vacancy numbers. That's actually true vacancies here in the province, according to numbers that we've been given by the department. So that was the latest report in October. Privatization and the use of these agencies should be dwindling post-pandemic. But yet we've seen the increased costs from $1 million to $35.6 million from April to October last year. That's a staggering amount of money. I am going to say that we have spent 2-3 times that amount, if not 4 times, over the past 3 years. We have to invest in retention and look at the workplace issues that are driving people out of the public health care system. Flexibility of scheduling, pay, which we just increased with our current collective agreement, the ability to get time off, address violence and workplace injuries. We have 3.9% higher rates of violence in healthcare than any other sector in this province. Those are staggering statistics. Every second day, a registered nurse is injured and files a workplace NL file for a workplace injury. It is double that for LPNs and PCAs.
Right.
We have to address the workplace issue.
When you get a chance to sort of communicate with either the minister's office or the government itself, do you have any meetings scheduled with either the Minister of Health or the Premier or anybody to discuss some of the fallout from this? Because I can tell, I've heard you get animated before, but I don't think I've ever heard you quite as upset as I think you are.
No, I don't have any follow-up meetings scheduled with either the Minister or the Premier. They know how I feel about the money that's being spent on agency nurses, on private agencies, versus the money that should be invested in our publicly funded healthcare system and the people who are in the system. Now, I'm not saying there hasn't been gains. We had an announcement for childcare for healthcare workers. That came about because of the nursing think tank and the research that was done by government and by RNU on some of the barriers to casual nurses taking a permanent full-time position with childcare, and we are making headway with that. So that's something that we've worked on together. We've also worked on this travel locum pilot that we're doing with Labrador. But it's been extended because we're having issues getting the evaluation done. It's an extra $25 per hour that our registered nurses and nurse practitioners get for traveling to Labrador to do locums. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than private agencies and what they're charging our healthcare system. Our door is always open. Our members are solution-orientated. And if government wants to get serious, we're ready to sit down and talk about how we go about incentivizing our members to stay in the system, but also how do we recruit our graduates and keep them here in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Mm-hmm. Yvette Coffey, appreciate your time. I suspect we'll be speaking again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony.
That's Yvette Coffey, President of the Registered Nurses Union of Newfoundland and Labrador. Clearly, there is. I've been speaking with Yvette Coffey, I think, for the last couple of years now, and the shortage of nurses has just gotten more and more serious. And then, of course, the government has the political pressure of trying to find ways of getting anybody into the healthcare field to come here and work, and has chosen a route which has obviously resulted in a bit of controversy, as the Globe exposed on Friday and into the weekend. Any thoughts on this story and the discrepancy between what RNs are paid and what these travel nurses and these agencies are paid? And that's an important distinction, because all of the money, if you actually take a look at the Globe story, there's a difference between the amount the agency is getting and what's actually ending up in the hands of the nurses those agencies provide, although those nurses are still making, as Yvette Coffey pointed out, 2 to 3 times what the the nurses who are here already in the system. Give our talkback line a call, 709-576-5207. That's 709-576-5207, or toll free 1-800-465-6846, 1-800-465-6846, and you can always send us an email to onthego@cbc.ca. That's on the go, one word, @cbc.ca.